All right, we are going to get started here digging into Adobe Photoshop, and we're going to start here on the left-hand side with the toolbar. Toolbar has a ton of really great features on it that we're going to use a lot. In fact, most of the time we're doing something in Photoshop, we're doing it with one of the tools on the toolbar. Not always, but a lot of the times. The first thing you need to know is what happens if you can't see your toolbar, like I just made mine disappear. We'll just come up here to the top of your screen and click on Windows. You can come down here to Tools, and then your toolbar will come back. So let's get started. We're going to go through most of these tools here. We'll talk a little bit about what they are, what they do, and their keyboard shortcut. And we are going to start with the Move tool. It's the first one here on the toolbar. It's the Move tool, and its keyboard shortcut is V. By the way, you should have already printed out this worksheet. If you haven't, make sure you go back and do that so that you have this to fill out. And here we go. Let's talk about the Move tool. The Move tool, what it does is it allows us to move things around. So, for example, if I wanted to move this photograph from here over to here, I would do that using the Move tool. And if I wanted to put it back in here, I do that using the Move tool. So now I've got two copies of this photograph, and I can move things around, and I do it all using the Move tool. So anytime that you get instructed to move something, you do that with the Move tool. And again, its keyboard shortcut is V. And probably one of the smartest things you could do is when you select the Move tool is come up here and check the box right here that says Auto Select Layer. That will come in super handy later on as you do things in Photoshop. It's one of the first things I always do when I start up Photoshop. Move tool, Auto Select Layer. And you only have to do that once. Once you've done it, it will be there forever. So there you go. That's the Move tool. Up next is our Marquee tool. And if you look on the, whoops, that should be a U and then an EE, and its keyboard shortcut is M. If we look over here on the toolbar on the Marquee tool, you'll see this little black triangle in the bottom right-hand corner. And what that means is that there are more tools hiding underneath it. So what I can do is right-click on that tool. And you can see, let me move this here. I've got more tools here. I've got a rectangular marquee tool, an elliptical marquee tool, and then a couple other ones. These are the ones we use the most, and these are for creating selections. Let me show you what I mean by that. If I grab my marquee tool and I come over here to this photograph, I click and drag a box that makes a selection around the surfer. You can see it's a selection by these little moving lines here moving around. Well, I've now selected that area, and anything I do to this photograph will only happen inside of here. So for example, if I grabbed like a brush tool and tried to paint, you can see I can only paint inside the selection. Or if I grab the Move tool and I move it, I'm only moving what's in that selection. So selections are pretty handy, and two of the selections that we use are the rectangular and the elliptical marquee tool. And we can get to those by pressing keyboard shortcut M, and then you can also right click on this to see additional tools. And you'll notice a lot of these tools on the toolbar have the little black triangle, which means there's more tools hiding underneath there. All right. Up next we have the Lasso Tools. And this is the keyboard shortcut L. And if we take a look at the Lasso tool, you'll see that there's also three different tools hiding in here. We got the regular Lasso tool, the Polygonal Lasso tool, the magnetic Lasso tool. And what the Lasso tool does is it allows us to draw selections, make selections that we draw any shape we want. So the regular Lasso tool allows us to make some weird looking selection. And then again, we've made a selection that we can move, or we can draw in, or we can adjust kind of any way we want. So that's the regular Lasso tool. We've also got hiding under here the Polygonal Lasso tool, which allows us to make selections with straight lines. So you can see I'm making a nice straight line selection here. And I could do the same thing with that one that I did with my other ones. And then there's the magnetic Lasso tool, which we may get into later. Let's not worry about that now. It's a little more complex than we have time for in this video. Okay, so moving on, we have the Quick Selection tool. And its keyboard shortcut is W, which seems kind of random until you see that hiding underneath the Quick Selection tool is the Magic Wand tool. Well, the Magic Wand tool used to be the tool to use, but now we use the Quick Selection tool. And it's about the keyboard shortcut of W stuck that came from Wand. So we'll get into more into this one later on in Photoshop, but just know that it's a pretty cool tool. Up next we have the Crop tool, keyboard shortcut of C, easy to remember. The Crop tool is super handy because it allows us to, I'll show you, it allows us to crop out things we don't want. If we only want the surfer in this photograph and want to get rid of everything else, we just grab the Crop tool, and then we click and drag a box around what we want to keep, and then we press Enter on our keyboard, and we've cropped out the stuff we don't want. And we use the Crop tool for that. It's Great little tool, very handy. Up next we have the Eyedropper, and its keyboard shortcut is I. And the eyedropper itself is kind of handy, but there's a lot of things underneath it that are also very handy, including the ruler tool and the color sampler tool. We'll get into some of these later on and what you can do with these things. But just know that that's the eyedropper tool, and that's where it's hiding at. Up next we have, this is the patch tool that we see now, but we also have the healing brush tool and the spot healing brush tool. We're going to go ahead and just call this one the healing brush because it's all we have room for. But know that there's other things underneath it that are also super handy. This is used very frequently in the retouching of people and removing zits and things like that. And it's a great little tool that we will definitely get into later on in this course. Up next we have the brush tool. This is one that we're going to spend a lot of time on later on. Its keyboard shortcut is the letter B. And the brush tool is important because there are a lot of other tools that work just like the brush tool. For now, all you need to know is that the brush tool allows us to paint with whatever color we want onto our canvas. The key thing about the brush tool is that you'll notice is that it is a circle. And because it is a circle, we can change the size of it. We can make it bigger or smaller or softer or harder. And I'm going to teach you how to do all these things later on. But just know that that bad boy is the brush tool. Don't get it confused with this one down here that looks kind of like it's the brush tool, but it's got this weird little arrow. That's the history brush tool, and we're not even going to get into that in this class, so don't even worry about it. All right, up next we have the clone stamp. This is one of everybody's favorite tools. We'll spend some time learning how it works, but I'll show you real quick what it does. It allows us to, as you might have guessed, clone things. If I want two surfers in this photograph, I can just clone him over here, and I didn't do a very good job because I was in a hurry, but now I've got two surfers. And that's what the clone stamp allows us to do. This is how we used to remove zits and blemishes from people's face until the healing brush came along and did an even better job than the clone stamp did of that. But that keyboard shortcut is S on that one. Down here we've got the eraser. Its keyboard shortcut is E, and we don't use the eraser very much, but it does pretty much exactly what you think it does. It erases things, and whoops, that was still the clone stamp. You can see if I erase things, they basically just disappear. It's not super helpful. There are a lot better things, a lot better ways to do this than with the eraser tool. I don't use it very often, but it does occasionally serve a purpose. And again, there are additional tools underneath it. The background eraser tool can actually be pretty cool, and we may get into that later on in the course. Okay, here we have the paint bucket or the gradient tool. The default one is the gradient tool, and that's what's showing here. So we'll call this one gradient. And that's keyboard shortcut G. But hiding underneath it is the paint bucket tool. They're both great little tools. They both serve a purpose. The gradient tool, what it does is it makes gradients, which is where lines fade from, or colors fade from one to the other. You can see I made kind of a weird looking one here. And if I go back, I'll do that. And then the paint bucket tool is used for filling things with a color. So if I want to fill things in here with black, I use the paint bucket tool to do that. And there's lots of little tips and tricks to it that you need to understand, and we'll get into that a little bit later on in the course. Let's keep moving on. Here we have, this one's a little bit confusing. We're going to start by calling this the dodge tool, but it's much more than that. You can see that hiding underneath this here is, oops, that's the wrong one. We've got the dodge tool, the burn tool, and the sponge tool. The dodge tool is the default one, as you can see there, but I'm showing the sponge here. But the dodge is the main one. It looks like a little lollipop, and these are terms that go back to time when photographers used to work in a dark room. I won't get into what they do right now, but I do want you to know that their keyboard shortcut is the letter O. Okay, up next we have the pen tool. Keyboard shortcut P. The pen tool is awesome, but it's also kind of complex, and so we will definitely get into that a little bit later on. Here we have the text tool. This is what we use for doing our typing and all that fun stuff. We'll learn more about that later on. Just know that if you're going to add text to Photoshop, you do that using the text tool, and its keyboard shortcut is the letter T. And we're going to skip one here, and here we have the Shape tool. Here's a tool that allows us to make all different kinds of shapes in Photoshop. So I come in and right click it. I've got let me move this so we can see it here. I've got a rectangle tool, a rounded rectangle, a ellipse, which is a circle, polygon, a line, and a custom shape tool. So we can make all kinds of different shapes here. And when we do, it just makes a nice little circle for us. It fills it with a color. The color was set to black, but if we'd wanted to do red or something like that, we certainly could have. And the keyboard shortcut for the shape tool is, of course, U. Let me write that down. U is the keyboard shortcut there. So coming down here, we have the hand tool. And this keyboard shortcut, it actually has two of them. I prefer to use the space bar. And what the hand tool does, it's pretty cool, is when we are zoomed in on a photograph, so let's say I'm going to zoom way in on this, no matter what tool we have selected, I'm going to come over and select the brush tool again. No matter what tool I have selected, if I press and hold the space bar, you can see my cursor turned into a hand right there. And now I can click and drag and I can move my photograph around even though I'm zoomed away in. This is much easier than coming over and try to using these bars to move the canvas around, to move the photograph around. So no matter what tool you have selected, if you just press and hold the space bar, you can click and drag and move your photograph around and get to where you need to be editing. So that is my preferred keyboard shortcut for the hand tool, is the space bar. In fact, I never actually ever click on the hand. I just always use the space bar. Same thing with this next tool. I never actually even click on it. This is the zoom. And if you followed the preferences video, we have it set up so that you can zoom in and out in Photoshop. By just using the scroll wheel on your mouse, by scrolling down, you zoom out. Scrolling up, you zoom in. Its keyboard shortcut, though, for those of you who really want to write it down, is the letter Z. We'll select the zoom tool. But it's much, much better to use the scroll wheel on your mouse. And again, doing that is something we set up in the preferences. That's not the default to be able to scroll with your mouse. So make sure you watch that video so you know how it's done. All right, we're almost done here, boys and girls. Up next we have the default colors and the exchange colors. Both of those will make much more sense when we explain the two boxes that come after it. But let me write this in here. The default colors is, keyboard shortcut is D, and the exchange is X. And what these two things do is they actually adjust these two boxes down here. This is our foreground color, and this is our background color. And we can tell the difference because, watch as I zoom in here. The foreground color is obviously on the top, and the background color is behind it. So these colors can be changed by clicking on either one of them. I click on the foreground or the background one. I click on the background one, and you can see this box right here pops up. And this allows us, so let me move this over here. This allows us to pick a color. I can choose red or black, or I can move this slider over here, choose green or blue or purple or red or yellow or orange. And I can pick a color inside of here, whatever I want. And once I select a color, I press OK, and you can see that color I just selected is now my background color. If I choose a new foreground color by clicking on this, let's choose a nice green. I now have a green and yellow, orangish foreground and background color. Well, remember, exchange, this little button right here, keyboard shortcut X, will switch those two colors. So whether I click on that or I press X on my keyboard, those two colors will switch. And then this one right here is to restore these two boxes to their default color, which is black and white. So if I click on this little right here or I press D on my keyboard, you can see those were reset to black and white. And I can still switch them with exchange by clicking the X on my keyboard or clicking this little button right here. Okay, I just want to show you one last thing here with the toolbar. Notice along the top of the screen here in Photoshop that whenever I change my tool, what's along the top here changes. So, for example, if I have the crop tool selected, I have an options to put in the width and the height and the resolution. But if I switch to the move tool, then those are gone, and now there are things that are related to the move tool. So if I tell you to grab the crop tool and put some information in the top, you'll know you've got these boxes right here. And whatever tool you have selected, it will change depending on what tool you select. So there you go. That is all the tools on the toolbar that you're going to need to know to be successful in this class. Make sure you write all these down. Make sure you write down all their keyboard shortcuts. And I suggest you start memorizing them because they are very valuable information to know.